You're listening to Big World Network.
Keeping House. Episode 1. Written by E.T. Mills. Read by Lana Lee. Lady Evangeline Stoddard, Countess of Wibley, stared across the desk at Mr. Popple, of Popple Employment Agency, and decided that lying was her best option. "I'm a housekeeper," she insisted. "I'm looking for something in that line of work." Evie normally didn't make a habit of lying. Her mother had seen to that. But in this case, she didn't know what else to do. She had already been to 4 other employment agencies. At the first 2, she made the mistake of flashing her rank and title around, assuming they would bow down to her wishes. But apparently nobody took a countess seriously when she said she was looking for work. They simply bowed her out of the office. At the other agencies, she omitted her full name, but unwisely agreed to a skills assessment so they could place her in the most suitable job. They laughed her out the door after determining she had no marketable skills. She was not about to repeat those mistakes now. Mr. Popple, who was a grey, lifeless sort of man with a monotone voice, turned positively bubbly at her declaration. "A housekeeper," he chirped. "Indeed? Well then, young lady, I have just the job for you." He waltzed across the office, zipped open a filing cabinet, and produced a thick file. "Mr. James Winkle is in immediate need of a housekeeper, and I think you'll suit very well." He grinned broadly as he completed a form. "Mr. James Winkle?" Evie repeated. "What sort of man is he?" He's in a business something or other," Mr. Popple said vaguely, as he scribbled out a few more lines, sealed the form, and handed it to her with a bit of a bounce. "Now, it's a live-in position, and the location is a touch remote, but you won't mind that, will you? You'll take the South Road out of town. Tinsbrook Village is a 3-mile walk from here, and Mr. Winkle's residence, Grimley Cottage, is a half-mile south of the village. Present this paper. It gives you my full recommendation, and if Mr. Winkle agrees to hire you on, have him sign at the bottom and post it back to me." And that was it! No references, no awkward questions about previous work experience. Evie marvelled over her good fortune as Mr. Popple accompanied her to the door and sent her off with a gracious goodbye. She carefully slid the paper into the pocket of her peasant frock. She had a job, or at least would have one once she persuaded this Winkle person that she was worth every word of Mr. Popple's recommendation. Evie had no concerns there. She was a master of persuasion. And once she had this job, and held on to it for 3 months, she would win her bet. Then that snooty little housemaid would have something to huff about. Evie still grew red in the face when she thought about that presumptuous servant girl who had dared suggest that she, Lady Evangeline Stoddard, wasn't competent enough to get even the most meagre of jobs, much less keep a job that required real work. As she neared the edge of town, she heard a familiar sound behind her, and groaned. It was her brother's blasted carriage again. She thought she had eluded it after breakfast, but the driver had somehow found her. Evie had a few choice words saved up for her brother Darius. He was such a fuss and a nuisance, insisting on trailing her so he could bring her home when she came to her senses and saw the stupidity of her wager. As if... And since Evie refused to get into the carriage, it followed her every step, like a faithful lapdog. Nothing made a girl feel more conspicuous than having a fully crested carriage with a team of white horses at her heels. Even worse, anyone she approached to ask for a ride took a look at that carriage and laughed in her face. so she had to walk the entire 3 miles to Tinsbrook village. When she reached the village, she took action. Do you always have strange men in black carriages stalking the girls in this village? She fearfully asked the vendor, who sold her a loaf of crusty bread for lunch. That man has been hot on my heels, leering at me. She looked back at her brother, who was hanging his head out the carriage window, and was, in fact, leering at her. The vendor looked blackly at the carriage and sent away his own 2 girls, who were managing the next stand over. Evie worked her way casually down the main road as it rapidly emptied of young women. Within minutes, her brother's carriage was surrounded by a dozen men who looked like they meant business. The driver was pleading with them to let him through, and Darius was snapping unpleasantly at the crowd. With the carriage thus mired behind her, Evie left town, whistling merrily. In spite of sore feet, she enjoyed the remainder of her walk immensely. The sun shone warm on her bare head, and the countryside was lushly beautiful. She loved the chalky smell of the dirt road and seeing the birds swoop around her. She loved being a peasant and wearing the cute brown gingham dress and ruffled apron, both of which she'd had specially designed for her excursion. She loved everything about this adventure. She was so in love that she almost missed Grimley Cottage. It stood a good measure back from the road, looking for all the world like an abandoned hovel. Weathered shutters hung crookedly around blankly staring windows. The exterior paint was peeling so badly Evie could hardly tell what colour it was, and the yard was so overgrown that it threatened to bring down the porch. Evie surveyed all this with dismay, wondering for the first time at Mr. Popple's eagerness to assign her this post. She struggled for a minute with the front gate, and as she finally forced it open, the fair weather broke into a sudden torrent of rain. With a squeal, she sprinted up a trampled path to the front door. Her knock produced a series of bangs and howls from within the cottage, the clatter of something tumbling downstairs, a tremendous crash, and at length a voice shouting, "Oh, blast it all, just come in!" Evie timidly opened the door and poked her head in, crying out when she saw the front room in complete shambles, and a man crumpled at the bottom of a staircase, rubbing his backside and trying to disentangle himself from a pile of boxes. The floorboards shuddered beneath her feet as she ran in and helped the man up. "Thank you," he said, barely glancing at her as he set about in search of something on the floor. Evie considered him with modest surprise. She'd expected her employer to be a stodgy, bold, and aging gentleman, but this man was rather young, with patchy clothes twisted awkwardly about him, and thick brown hair tied in a messy stub at his neck. "Can I help you?" he asked distractedly. Evie thought he should be asking for help, rather than offering it. The man looked absolutely lost as he hunted among the scattered boxes. "You are Mr. James Winkle, aren't you?" she asked, and he nodded briefly. "What are you looking for?" "My glasses. Here they are." He smashed the spindly frames onto his face, where they hung lopsided as he peered at her. "Oh dear, you're a client. Now, don't tell me you're the young lady with the possessed cat, aren't you? I assure you Fluffy is going to be just fine." "I beg your pardon?" "Not it, then? He snapped his fingers. "Oh, of course, I should have remembered. You're the lady with the case of halitosis. Didn't the treatment work?" Evie took a surreptitious sniff at her breath. "I've just come from Popple Employment Agency. I'm to be the new housekeeper. My name is Evie Stoddard." She could have kicked herself then, realizing she should have been using an assumed name. If he recognized the well-known name of the Countess of Wibley, that would be the end of this job prospect. But Mr. James Winkle just stared at her vacantly and scratched his head. "You know, it's the strangest thing," he said. "Women are always saying that to me lately. They knock on the door, announce I'm a housekeeper, and then they go away immediately without another word. I don't know what to make of it. Is it a prank?" "Not this time. I am a housekeeper." She hoped she sounded convincing. "So do I get the job?" "What job?" "The job as your housekeeper." "I'm not looking for a housekeeper," Mr. Winkle protested. "But Mr. Popple sent me." Exasperated, Evie pulled the paper from her pocket and held it under his nose. "He said to give you this." Mr. Winkle adjusted his glasses and examined the form for a minute. Yes, that clarifies things a bit. It says here that Mrs. Miranda Winkle made the order. That's my mother," he explained. "She popped in for a visit last month. I guess this means she didn't like what I've done with the place." He winced apologetically. "I do keep busy with my work." Whatever his work was, it certainly had nothing to do with cleaning. Evie had never seen such an untidy room. She suspected it must be a sitting room, though there was no place to sit. A lurid plaid armchair was piled high with smudgy old books, as was a mismatched blue sofa. The bookshelves lining the walls were stuffed with dusty bottles, junk mail, and bits and pieces of badly mummified animals. And she was the one who would be cleaning this if she got the job. She must be crazy. "So, are you going to hire me?" she asked again, uncertainly. "Well, I think I'd better, or I'd never hear the end of it from Mother. No, that can hardly sound flattering. What I mean to say, Miss Stoddard, is it? Well, I'd be pleased to hire you if you'll take the post. Maybe I should have an extra hand around here anyway. It says here I'm to pay you 2 silvers a week." He glanced up at her, and her contempt at working for such a piddling amount must have shown on her face, because he looked uncertain and added, "Maybe we should make that 3 silvers a week." Evie sighed. She was in this to win a bet, after all, not for profit. "Fair enough," she was about to say, but at that moment a sudden explosion rocked the house. With a strangled cry, Mr. Winkle leapt up the stairs, shouting, "My potion! Blast it!" Evie stood awkwardly at the bottom of the stairs, wondering what housekeepers were meant to do when things exploded. In addition to the front door, there were 2 doors leading from this room. She poked her head through one, discovered the kitchen, and winced at the piles of dishes and debris. If she didn't know better, she'd have thought the explosion happened in there. The other door, though unlocked, stuck tight. She pulled as hard as she could, but every time it inched a bit open, something yanked it back and held it fast. When she turned around again, she found her employer had reappeared, and saw 2 lifeless stubs where his arms used to be. Evie began screaming hysterically. "Your arms! You've blown off your arms!" She tripped over her bags and crashed into him, and they both toppled to the floor. "Stop screaming, that only makes it worse," he exclaimed, struggling to help her up. "My arms are fine, see?" "Well, no, I guess you can't see," he chuckled. "It's just the invisibility potion I've been experimenting with. It's blown up and gotten everywhere, all over my arms, too. See, I just waved my hand at you." With a small cry, Evie fell back against the book-strewn sofa. "What on earth are you doing with an invisibility potion?" she panted. "Didn't that Mr. Popple tell you? I'm a wizard. It's my job." Well, this was a drawback. Evie didn't like wizards. They couldn't be trusted. Wizards were always brimming with political ambition, vying for prominence and angling for favours. She remembered one particular wizard who had sought her favour. He wasn't much for conversation, as she recalled, and for every mischievous hand she slapped away, he conjured up 2 more to replace it. Her mother had seen to it that he was stranded somewhere on the opposite end of the world. Now here she was, practically begging a wizard to take her into his employ. Evie gazed longingly at the front door, her feet itching to leave. But she stood firm. This was the only job she could get. She had to stay on if she was going to win this wager, wizard or not. Besides, she couldn't just walk out on a man whose arms had gone missing. "Whoops, here it comes," Mr. Winkle announced. "This potion really spreads. See there? He pointed at the stairs, and Evie could see a hazy purplish line oozing down, followed by nothing. The stairs were disappearing, and she could see nothing of the landing above, except a few splotches of wall. The potion rapidly reached the bottom level, and the floor around their feet disappeared. "Be a dear, Miss Stoddard, and help me clean up this mess," Mr. Winkle bleated meekly. "What mess?" Evie asked pointedly, since all the mess she could see was vanishing before her eyes. Now was the time for forwardness. She snapped, 4 silvers. I'll stay for 4 silvers a week." Then she got to work. Evie spent the rest of the day scrubbing invisible floors and trying to wash potion out of things she couldn't even see. She wasn't thrilled when her hands faded away, but the wizard reassured her, claiming that if everything got a good rinse, the full effects of the potion would wear off by morning. "If my calculations are correct," he added. It was hard work, but not as terrible as Evie might have expected. Cleaning up invisibility potion was certainly the most novel thing she'd ever done. James Winkle was affable and scrubbed right alongside her, and she thought that maybe she could stand working for a wizard for a few months. By the end of the day, she was calling him Jimmy and telling him in no small words just what she thought of invisibility potions and those who played with them. Jimmy Winkle just laughed at her. "We ought to be finding you a room to sleep in, if there are any left to be found upstairs." "Oh no!" Evie wailed suddenly. "My bag! All my peasant clothes! They've disappeared!" "Peasant clothes?" Jimmy patted her on the shoulder with an invisible hand. "Don't you worry, they'll turn up before long. Go and get yourself a good night's sleep, and we'll find your things in the morning. I think I can scare up an extra pair of peasant pajamas for you." She sighed in defeat and stumbled behind him up the stairs, which was still riddled with invisible patches. The room Jimmy gave her was amazingly untouched by the potion, but when she tried to follow him inside, the door slammed shut in her face. "Oh, don't mind that," Jimmy apologized as he pried it open. "The house is always a little rude to newcomers. It'll get used to you." Startled by the concept of a cognizant house, Evie edged into the room. It was just as cluttered as the sitting room below had been, and the bed looked cramped. But she was so tired she almost didn't care. Almost. She had never slept in a hole like this and didn't relish the night ahead of her. Not wanting to be a complete lump regarding the room, she cast her eyes about for anything to admire. "This is pretty," she said, bending over to examine an intricate pastoral painting propped up against the baseboards. "Oh, that shepherd just flipped me off!" Jimmy laughed. "Isn't it hysterical? A buddy from college gave it to me as a gag gift. Watch the sheep. I love it when—" He saw her dark scowl. Yes, why don't I just take that and enjoy it in my own room?" He yawned. "Sure is nice to have a relaxing day for once." She was almost certain he was joking. "Good night, then," he continued cheerily. "I guess in the morning you can begin doing whatever it is housekeepers do, and I am going to get a fresh start on that invisibility potion." He wandered off to his own room, oblivious to her garbled exclamation. Evie stared at her closed door, exhausted. Today's experiences had been novel, even amusing, but the probability of spending the next day cleaning up yet another invisibility potion was almost enough to break her resolve. As she drifted off to sleep that night, wearing a pair of Jimmy's striped pajamas, which she suspected might not be properly laundered, and listening to the rain pounding outside, she wondered how many bona fide housekeepers had passed up this job before Mr. Popple duped her into taking it.
Music by Kevin MacLeod.
You're listening to Big World Network.